Okay, so in conjunction with rhetoric, they were talking about rhetoric, this rhetorical triangle that Aristotle talks about, ethos, pathos, logos. So what are those three parts? Okay, ethos is, what is it about the person who is conveying the message? That's ethos, and that's what we're talking about today. What gives somebody credibility? How do we assess credibility? What errors do we sometimes make in assessing? What are the sort of the common errors in assessing credibility? But that is to say, when do we give credibility to somebody or a source, an individual or a source, when maybe we shouldn't? So that's ethos, and that connects to logos. What is this person saying, and who are they saying it to? That's the audience. That's pathos. But we're talking about ethos today. Okay, so I put this up. I think it's like a, some of you guys know these people, Top Gear. So I wish I had a British accent. Everything sounds more credible in a British accent. So you listen, you think about, let's say, David Attenborough, a nature documentary, and it does have, it seems to be more credible, more sort of educated and sophisticated. But that is just to say, I put this up just to, as a sort of a joke. But the point is that, yeah, we do substitute. We do have all these indicators for credibility that, upon closer examination, might not necessarily indicate anything. So let me just, before we jump into it, I want to give you just a few examples of what we have to deal with today, and how the job of assessing credibility is important, but becoming excessively difficult. And I guess my point is, a lot of these examples are going to pertain to, this new form of information. We all have now, we have this sort of democratization of information, and we also have sort of the means of production, so that anybody can basically generate propaganda if they wanted to. Okay, it's not like, Joseph Goebbels and a few people have the means of generating propaganda. Really, anybody now. We have more people now that feel as though they're politically. I guess that's a good thing that Trump did. Trump made people seemingly interested in politics that had never known anything about politics. So now we have more people involved in the discussion, and we have more people that have the means of production in terms of media input and so on. And so anybody can generate propaganda. Let me just give you 4 examples. Okay, I gave you this example, I believe, in another class. My father, who we bought basically a tablet for, and now he watches YouTube, believes he's on some news channel. He believes he's watching the news. Okay, so I told him, I said, you're not watching the news. You're watching a source which is presenting itself as the news. It's hijacking the sort of the tropes and the template of news. You have these 2 people that look like anchors that are sitting at a desk. There's a news ticker at the bottom. But really what you're looking at is a private YouTube channel that is being produced by an individual or a handful of individuals that have a very specific political narrative and agenda that they want to try to advance. And they're presenting themselves as though they have all of the sort of it's kind of a refined production. Okay. And all of the basic semblances of what he and in his whole life has been associated with official news outlets has now been hijacked. So that's the first example. The hijacked ethos, the hijacked credibility of the basic template of a news channel. That's number 1. Another one. There are some, let's say, fossil fuel lobbyists and so on, that every once in a while, they will take footage of indigenous groups protesting, and they'll rearrange it and so on, and make it look as though these are indigenous groups protesting for, Trans Mountain Pipeline. My wife just came across one the other day. There's this whole bandwagon of, this whole convoy of trucks heading to Ottawa, tomorrow. And on one of these people's Facebook, whatever, social media, they had posted this video of this indigenous group, this drum circle. And they say, here we have, these are the natives. The natives are in support of the truck convoy. And everybody said, oh, well, the natives are on board, so that's great. The indigenous, that means it's good. I'm not a racist. I was concerned that these people are sort of white nationalists, but this sounds great. Okay. And a little bit of digging, uncovers that, no, actually, this is footage from 2018 for a completely unrelated cause. So again, this hijacked credibility, this deliberate manipulation. So it becomes difficult to sort of assess who we can trust and who we cannot trust. That's another one. Basically using footage, taking footage and utilizing it in a way completely out of the original context for the specific ends of, basically convincing somebody of a cause, manipulation, and this obviously clear distortion of the facts. Another example, sometimes I listen to Stephen Bannon, War Room. Stephen Bannon is basically the architect behind the whole Make America Great Again and Donald Trump. He's the architect, and he's got a bunch of people. He advances all kinds of ideas, but every once in a while he talks about COVID, and he has these guests on, and I forget their I forget what their exact name is, but he says, "Oh, doctor, oh, thank you, doctor so and so, doctor, doctor." He keeps calling her doctor, and she is a doctor, okay, and he's referring to her credentials as doctor through the whole episode, okay, this whole podcast of whatever it may be, half an hour, 45 minutes, really drilling it home that you are listening to a doctor. Thank you, doctor for joining us, okay. And again, all under all under the context that we're having a conversation about vaccines and infectious diseases and so on. And a very quick search reveals that this doctor is not a medical doctor. This doctor is a PhD in English literature. So a complete hijacking of honorific, okay, a credential, doctor, in a context which that doctor, where that credential is really not applicable. Okay, that's another example. And this is my favorite one. This one was really special, really shocking. This one came across on YouTube. Okay, one of these ads, a lot of weird ads. Okay, ads on YouTube that we would have never seen on commercial television. Okay, supposedly there's imagining there's some kind of vetting taking place, but this is what the ad consists of. Okay, it starts off, again, stealing the sort of the template of news. So it starts off with the CBC logo, okay, Canadian National Broadcasting Corporation, their logo. So it looks like, okay, this is going to be a newsreel. So it starts off like that, like a news flash, breaking news. And then it's an auditorium, and there's a man speaking. And he says, "Oh, I'm here to introduce to you our speaker." So all of a sudden now it sounds like it's going to be a lecture. Okay. And this is all a YouTube ad. Okay. It's like a 7-minute ad. And so it's a guy speaking. He says, "I'm going to introduce to you our speaker, Elon Musk." Elon Musk is the founder of Tesla, SpaceX. So welcome everybody, Elon Musk. And then you hear this applauding, and then it's footage of Elon Musk. Okay. And Elon Musk starts speaking, but it's not his voice, okay? It's somebody else pretending, and he says, it's somebody else's voice. It's somebody else now with the footage of Elon Musk pretending to be Elon. It's pretty badly made. It's pretty embarrassing. And he says, "Hi, I'm Elon Musk. I'm SpaceX and Tesla and all this stuff. And I'm here to introduce to you my new idea. My new idea is basically, I have quantum computers that can predict the stock market with 90% accuracy. No, just give me your money." And, so that's interesting. That is really taking advantage of naive and stupid people, that you are going to utilize the figure of Elon Musk, which is, I imagine, unrecognizable for most people, even, and, assuming now you're trying to tap into the people that know Elon Musk but don't recognize his voice and are not going to take the time to realize that what this person is saying and how Elon Musk's lips are moving doesn't match up. So very, very strange. Okay, so a complete hijacking of the credibility of, let's say, Aboriginal protest groups, media, classical media tropes, very easily hijacked. And people that we would otherwise give credibility to, maybe like somebody like Elon Musk, and also the hijacking of credentials such as doctor in a context where those credentials are non-applicable at all, okay? But utilized in that way. Okay, so let's get into this here. So what I want to do is I want to talk about why do we need to trust, okay? Credibility goes back to this basic question of, well, I need to trust you, because this goes back to the question that I asked on the very first day of classes. You have not verified everything that you believe that you know, and you cannot verify everything that you claim to know and that you believe that you know. And we made the point that if you were, how much of what you think you know have you actually verified would be a small percentage, if you're really honest, probably less than 5%. Less than 5% of the things that I believe that I know, I have actually personally verified. It's actually less than that. And I said, but you shouldn't be embarrassed by that, because that's just how society is structured, okay? And we actually benefit from that tremendously. So then there is this requirement of trust. So I want to talk about trust, 2 seconds. I want to establish society. Then I want to talk about what gives somebody credibility or hinders their credibility. And then what are some common fallacies pertaining to credibility. Okay. This is going to stall on me now. Okay, so the question is, are we naturally inclined to trust each other? Are we sort of naturally trust averse, or are we naturally trusting? Just think about it, okay? I think that, just to speed things along here, I think that most people, I think that there's good, actually even psychological research to suggest that we are generally trusting. If somebody says something, what is the default? What is the default response? I believe that the default response is that we generally trust people, okay? Unless we have a reason to not trust them, okay? That is to say, you give the person the benefit of the doubt unless there's some sort of red flags that come up, okay? So we always have to be mindful of those red flags, or unless, the person has basically deceived us in the past, and then their credentials, their credibility is impacted. But we naturally have this this willingness to trust, and this, as I said, in a complex society is important, because the plumber doesn't know, what the electrical engineer is doing. The electrical engineer doesn't know what the farmer's doing. The farmer doesn't know, what the automotive repair guy is doing, and not anybody can have all of these skills. Okay. Maybe some people are sort of, virtuosos like that. They're sort of mavericks like that. Okay. Master of all skills. But generally it's like, we're limited. We're limited in our time and our resources and our attention. So we're only good at a few things. Okay. Jack of all trades and master of none. And I think that if you really want to develop deep expertise and skills and knowledge, then yeah, I mean, you have to sort of dedicate your time to that. And so you cannot be a master of everything. So that's already sort of one indicator, is if everybody is presenting themselves as this absolute virtuoso, okay, this maestro who knows absolutely everything about everything, that should raise a red flag, okay, because usually that's not how it works. So we'll come back to that, okay, this whole idea of the sort of the lone maverick against the institution. And we have this problem in science as well, this sort of this gap. We'll come back to this gap much later on in the semester, but there's a gap between the people that know and the people that don't know, okay? I don't know how my cell phone works. I don't know how this Zoom call works. We don't know how a lot of stuff works, but there is somebody that does know how it works, and that's great, okay? And we all sort of seem to benefit from that. So there is a gap between an expert and a non-expert. And furthermore, you can be an expert in one field. Being an expert in one field makes you nonetheless a non-expert in an unrelated field. So there is this gap, this epistemic gap, this knowledge gap that opens up between the ordinary person and people that have dedicated a lot of time to this. And so what this gap does, and this is a point that I want to make towards the end of the semester, is it opens up fertile ground for conspiracy theories and pseudosciences, because people can come in and enter into this chasm, enter into this gap between the expert and the non-expert, and even pose as experts. They can wear a white lab coat and so on. And so there was this meme that my friend had sent me the other day, and it was like, you can go to university and do an undergraduate and then do a graduate degree and even potentially postgraduate degree, and then you can go work for, let's say, a national research institute and verify the legitimacy of vaccines, and that accumulates to 15, 20 years of training, and you put your findings online, and some guy just calls bullshit. So that's the point that we made, is people now watch a half-an-hour documentary online on something, and they believe that they are experts and that they know more than the doctors or the engineers. So that's an interesting phenomenon as well. Okay, I just want you to appreciate here the scale, the complexity of scientific knowledge and scientific advancement. Just two examples, but long gone are the days of of Galileo, where you could be doing groundbreaking research and making discoveries from your own backyard with a homemade telescope. Now, usually, cutting edge science requires a cumulative effort, okay, of either everybody sort of pooling in data, or these massive projects that require a bunch of different minds and a bunch of different expertise. So just two simple examples here. We have a CERN, okay, the Large Hadron Collider. Some of you guys know what this is. I mentioned this in the largest scientific instrument on the face of the planet, that basically goes under the border of Switzerland and France. And this is a massive project. Okay, there's no singular person that can build this, and there's no singular person that can know how it operates. Okay, you need experimental physicists, theoretical physicists, engineers of all kinds. Okay, you need managers, you need the administrators. So it's a project that consists of thousands and thousands of people. Okay, and it's very impressive that everybody brings a tiny piece of the puzzle, and we managed to get all of these little tiny pieces of the puzzle to fit together in a way that actually leads to something that is verifiable and then potentially beneficial. Another example, this is from the journal Nature, the DNA sequence and biological annotation of human chromosome. And what I counted here, there's 131 different names. Okay, these are probably all research PhDs, and they probably have undergraduates working for them. So hundreds and hundreds of people. Yeah. So that's something good. Okay, that's something sort of, if you're a humanist, that's encouraging. Okay, that yeah, we can actually work together. We can make things happen, but it requires that we admit that we cannot know everything for ourselves, and that knowledge requires this complexity and requires trust. I guess that's the basic point. Okay, let's just define this very, very quickly here. What is credibility? Credibility is the power to inspire belief, the power to, as we said in this oral rhetorical triangle, the power to convey, to get your idea. How do you implant your idea into somebody else's head? And then we can make an assessment of credibility. What augments credibility? What diminishes credibility? And let me give this example. This goes back to the rhetorical triangle. Some of you guys may know who this is. Let me tell you this story. So suppose you are a young businessman. It's 1920s in Paris, and you are eager to join the ranks of the higher business elite. And you're looking for that, you're looking for that deal that's going to put you into that status. And you are invited by this individual who, if I'm not mistaken, presents himself as the Minister of Telecommunications. And he invites you to one of the nicest hotels in Paris, okay? Hotel Clérion on Place de la Concorde. And you're in a wonderful conference room. And there you enter the conference room and you see all the people that you admire and that you aspire to be in their ranks, all these other businessmen of Paris. And this monsieur here says, I'm here to take bids on the scrap metal of the Eiffel Tower, okay? Because the idea was that they were going to tear down the Eiffel Tower because it was basically just a defunct radio antenna. That was costly to maintain. Now, does this make sense? Does it not make sense? Actually, if you were in Paris in the 1920s or something like that, there were rumors circulating that the city was considering demolishing the Eiffel Tower. Okay, and people thought it was. People at that time thought that they should. Okay, they weren't really too impressed with the Eiffel Tower. So there were rumors circulating that we're going to tear down the Eiffel Tower, and here you are. This guy is saying, I need to secure, before we can make this announcement to the public, we need to secure bids, and we need to secure the logistics of what we're going to do with the scrap metal. So here I am, I'm here to take bids on the scrap metal of the Eiffel Tower. So now we have to ask these three questions. What is it about this person? And what is it about his credibility? What is it about the credibility of the whole situation? How is the whole situation potentially augmenting his credibility legitimately? How is the whole situation augmenting his credibility illegitimately? Okay, so what is it about the credibility of this person presenting this claim that he is the Minister of Telecommunications taking bids on the scrap metal of the Eiffel Tower? That's point number one. That's the credibility. That's the ethos part. Point number two is the logos. What is it about the message? What is it about the claim that the Eiffel Tower is going to be sold for scrap metal? Does that make sense? Does it not make sense? How do we assess the legitimacy of that claim? And thirdly, and this is what we're going to talk about next class, is what is it about you? What is it about you, your fears, your desires, your aspirations that may augment or prevent your ability to assess the reality of the situation here? Okay, so just keep that in mind. I'll come back to this particular story in a bit. Okay, so I want to go over these parts very, very quickly here. But we can talk about the credibility of a claim and the credibility of a source. And let's just unpack this here. Normally, I would have a little bit of a discussion, but I'm going to try to go a little bit faster. So the credibility of a claim versus the credibility of a source. So the credibility of something that is said versus the credibility of the person who is saying it. Okay, so let's consider the first part first here. How do we assess the credibility of a claim? How do you assess the credibility of a claim? What are some things that can get you to sort of question or raise some red flags about a statement or a claim? Let's see if we can name a few. Obviously, one of them is the one that I have here, is if I can verify something with my own observation, my own personal observation, and my own personal observation does not align with the claim, that should be in a, that should sort of modify the credibility of the claim. So if you say, Mike has a blue car, and you've been to my house and you've never seen a blue car, and maybe I do have a blue car somewhere, but it does start to call the claim into question. Okay, so that's one thing. What are some other things with regards to a specific claim? If a claim, here's another one. If a claim conflicts with your background information, so that is to say, you haven't verified it for yourself, but you've heard things from, people, from your friends, from your family. You've heard things in the news. You don't really necessarily remember where you've heard it. Okay. If a claim, that is to say, as soon as you hear something, there's a sort of filter that takes place. That claim is sort of filtered. And if it doesn't hit anything in that filter, then the claim is just sort of accepted and the alarm bells don't go off. But if there's something, if it doesn't pass through that filter, then this starts to, it sounds a bit funny. And so that is what we would call your initial plausibility. Let me give you an example. Is if I say there's ice on the surface of Mercury, how would you assess the credibility of that claim? You've never been to Mercury, okay? But you might be piecing together a few pieces of information. You say, okay, Mercury I know is fairly close to the sun, must be hot close to the sun, so there can't be ice. So I think that would be a fair assessment. Okay, that is what I mean by this initial plausibility in relation to this just sort of soup of information that you have swirling around in your head, that's in your memories, that you don't necessarily know exactly where it's from, just things that you've heard and so on. How does it fit? How does the information fit with what you already think that you know? Okay. Actually, in this case, I used that example a number of years ago, that surely there cannot be ice on the surface of Mercury, that your initial plausibility must be very, very low that there's ice on the surface of Mercury. But later that day, I did a little search, and actually there is ice on the surface of Mercury, because there's a deep, deep crevice on sort of the northern part of Mercury where the sun don't shine, and there's actually ice. Okay, But this is one of the things that we need to do with the presentations that I'm asking you to do on pseudoscience and conspiracy theories. Is, and at the get-go, you have to give me initial plausibility, okay? So you say, okay, let's say 9/11. 9/11, I had heard about it. I did some research, or I didn't do some research, but this is what I thought about, let's say, the claim that 9/11 was an inside job. I thought that probably no, but maybe yes, maybe let's say a 20% chance that maybe it was an inside job. Okay, now let me start my research, okay? Then you're gonna present your research, and then at your conclusion, you're going to give a sort of a reassessment. You're gonna say, before I started this project, I thought that maybe there was a 10% chance. I thought that maybe there was something fishy. I had heard these stories, that didn't make sense. Maybe whatever, if you want to put it in terms of a percentage, 10%, 20% chance 9/11 was an inside job. Then you say, okay, after my research, you might conclude, yeah, 9/11 is an inside job. Or you might conclude, there's less than 1% chance that 9/11 was an inside job. A reassessment, okay. We always have to do this. And this is what I said, I believe the first day of class. If you want to be a sort of pragmatic critical thinker, you have to do away with true and false. For the most part, we are not going to be in a position to determine that something is decisively true or false definitively. And in a philosophical sense, in a deeper philosophical sense, you will not be able to determine decisively. There's almost nothing that you can determine as being decisively necessarily true or false. So we have to take more of a sort of a probabilistic view of truth, okay? That it's how likely is it to be true, rather than is it true or is it false? How likely is it to be true based on my research? If I feel that my research has actually been adequate and unbiased and objective insofar as one can be objective. Okay, what else? How else can we assess the credibility of a claim? If a claim is contradictory, that definitely impacts the credibility of a claim. If a claim is inconsistent, okay, if you go see a car salesman on one day, and then you go back on another day and the story has changed, that it diminishes the credibility of the person's story, and it may also diminish their credibility. If you go see, let's say, a car from one dealership, and then you go to another dealership of the same brand, and you speak to another salesman regarding the same car, the same model, and you're getting different information, that inconsistency is going to undermine the story. And then you have to ask, well, there's at least one of them that's wrong there, okay? So not only is it impacting the credibility of the story, it's impacting the credibility of at least one of them. And then you might want to find out which one of them, if not both of them, don't know what the hell they're talking about. Here's another one, I think this is an interesting side point. Sort of a police interrogation method. If the police has a suspected criminal, they'll sit them down in the interrogation room and say, okay, tell me what you did last night. Started 6 p.m. Okay, 6 p.m. Okay, and then, and then I went to my friend's house, and then we drove here and we picked up our other friend, and then we went to this restaurant. It was 9 p.m. We finished, it was 10 o'clock. Then we went to this bar, and then we left at 2 in the morning. Okay, and that's the person's story. And then you say, okay, sure, sounds good. And then the police will leave. They'll go have a coffee. They'll let the person chill out a little bit, and they'll come back in maybe 10 minutes, 20 minutes later, and they say, okay, now tell me this whole series of events, but tell me backwards. Tell me the same story chronologically backwards. And what you're going to get is, that's sort of one way of revealing an inconsistency, is that if the person is honest, if the person's initial story was truthful, they usually do not have difficulty telling that story in reverse chronological order. But if they were making that story up, that story's pretty much, there's a good chance, this is what I've heard, there's a good chance that story's going to fall apart if it was made up. Okay, there's just something cognitively, they don't have the brain power to remember all the details in reverse order. Okay, so they end up screwing themselves over, and that's a way of catching somebody's inconsistency. Here's another one, just with regards to kind of car salesman here. This is no offense to car salesmen, credibility of car salesmen. But suppose you can have some sort of information in going in. So suppose you have somebody who owns an electric car, and they say, in the winter, your friend tells you, and your friend has no reason to lie to you. They say, in the winter, my car loses about 20% of its range. Suppose, okay? Now you already have that information. You can go into the dealership and pretend that you're ignorant, okay? So that is to say, you're inviting the person, you're inviting the salesman to lie to you. You are testing their credibility, okay? So you say, oh, does weather, does cold weather impact the effectiveness of the battery? Now the car salesman might say, yeah, you'll lose 10% or 15%. That's fair. He's obviously going to fudge the numbers in a way that makes it sound better, but it's fair. You're expecting him to lie to you a little bit. So if I've done research and I know, let's say the numbers loses 20% and he's going to tell me it loses 15 or 10%, I can accept that. You know what I mean? I can accept that you're going to fudge the numbers in a way that makes it in your interest. You want to sell a car, okay? But if you say, no, actually the battery doesn't lose any power during the winter, that starts to raise a flag, okay? Now you either don't know what you're talking about or you're lying to me. And if you say, no, actually it gains range in the winter, it's going to gain 20%. Now I know that I'm talking to a liar, okay? So now that, now I can assess what I want to do. Do I want to stay there and entertain his lies? Or do I want to just, cut my losses and go see somebody else? So assessing the credibility of a claim. The consistency, the logicality, is it devoid of contradiction? Does it fit with this, what we call background information, this whole soup of information that we have? And does it match up with available personal observation? Okay, now let's look at the credibility of a source. And what do we mean by source here? A source can be an individual, like the example I just gave, an individual salesman. It can be, a source can be a news outlet. It can be an institution. It can be an individual, it can be a group of people. So how do we assess the credibility of a source? This is a pretty good article, okay, from a philosophical journal. Experts, which ones should we trust? And he gives us 3 criteria. And we already touched upon these, a few of these, the first day of class when we were just sort of randomly discussing credibility. But this is a problem that goes back to Socrates. The question for Socrates is, how do I determine who actually is wise and who is not wise? So he gives us these criteria. Let's go through these, okay? Number 1 is, the more credible person is the person that has the stronger argument. Arguments presented by contending experts to support their views and critique their rivals' views. So that's a very interesting, the criteria is, whoever has the best argument wins. Doesn't matter what your credentials are, doesn't matter how well dressed you are, doesn't matter how confident you are, doesn't matter what your haircut is, doesn't matter how many people believe in you, doesn't matter how many followers you have, doesn't matter how many books you've sold, how many awards you've won. If you have the best argument, that should be the gold standard, okay? The best information, the best evidence, the best research, that's the gold standard. And now, again, going back to the little discussion about rhetoric and ethos that we had prior to starting, was the point that I made was the problem is precisely that you might have a genius. The example I gave you, let's say a very mundane teacher. You might have a genius who has all the best arguments and all the best research, but he's basically, socially handicapped, and he's really unable to effectively communicate his ideas. And the tragedy is that the reciprocal of that is you have the con artist. The con artist doesn't know what he's talking about, and he knows that he doesn't know what he's talking about. But he knows that he also knows that he can present it in such a way that it doesn't matter that he doesn't know what he's talking about. So you have this tragic flip, this tragic, reciprocal sides here. You have on one side, the genius who is socially inept, who has all the brilliant ideas but cannot communicate them. So that is to say, if this is our criteria, he should win, versus the con artist who knows he doesn't know what he's talking about, but knows how to put on a good show. Okay. And the problem, that's exactly what Socrates says. The problem with Socrates is that most people will gravitate towards the second person rather than the first person. And in doing so, you are violating here the first criteria, which is, do they know what they're talking about? When they present their ideas, does it make sense? Okay. So it's tricky. It is a tricky thing, this assessment of credibility. Okay, and then you add to that the whole world of, you know, manipulation of media and propaganda and deep fakes and all this stuff. It gets very complicated. So number one is the quality of the argument, the quality of the evidence, the quality of the research. That's the gold standard. Number two, this one we had already talked about a little bit. Agreement by additional putative experts on one side of the question or the other. So that is to say, consistency from other experts, from other seemingly informed people, that adds credibility. So if you are on, again, if you're sort of the lone wolf, you might be right, it's possible. But if the person, let's say you might listen to the one scientist who says climate change isn't real, but if you listen to another scientist and the other scientist is on the side of basically the 96 or 97% of scientists that say that climate change is, anthropogenic climate change is real, human beings are a cause of it, then that seems to add something. Okay, but what do we need to watch out here for? That is to say, you are corroborating the story by additional witnesses, if you want to speak in that way. Okay, you don't have just one witness. You have one witness that says this person committed the crime, and you have that witness that says this person committed the crime. But the second witness has a bunch of other witnesses as well that independently saw the same thing. So you would say that maybe the first person that saw it being another person, maybe that person is wrong. Okay, I think you get the point. More voices is better, but when? Okay, and when is it not better? Because this can easily become a sort of popularity vote, which it shouldn't be. Some things are not determined by popularity. So let me just make the point, is he warns us about what he calls the guru effect. Is the voices of additional experts only augments credibility when these additional experts are independent voices. Because if they are all basically echoing the boss, then it might sound as though you're listening to four experts, but it's really four experts reading from the same script. Okay, so keep that in mind. So you might, let's say, you might be, let's say, I don't know, at an anti-vax protest, and you might say, wow, but look at all these people, surely they can't all be wrong, but they're all reading from the same script. Okay, if you have to, credibility is only augmented when you have people reading from independent scripts. Okay. Number C here, okay? This is an interesting sentence. Appraisals by meta-experts of the expert's expertise, including appraisals reflected in formal credentials earned by experts. That's a funny sentence, okay? Look how many times expert is used in one sentence. What does it mean? What is meant here? What is meant by, what is a meta-expert? Anybody want to take a guess at what a meta-expert is? A meta-expert. A meta-expert is an expert of experts. Okay, this person is the expert who can tell you who's an expert and who's not an expert. Their expertise consists in telling you who's an expert and who's not an expert. But it's not a who, it's not a he, it's not a person. It's an institution. So what institution does this job of assessing the expertise of an expert? And in some sense, you're in one right now. Okay, you're in an academic institution does in some sense do this job. So institutions such as, let's say, professional unions, let's say professional orders. Let's say you have order of doctors, order of dentists, order of dermatologists, whatever it may be, order of nurses. They ensure that their members adhere to certain practices. They have had certain training. Sometimes they have to keep up with certain training. Institutions, academic institutions, okay? Schools, colleges, universities do this job of assessing whether or not you've attained some skill or some competency. So when you get a diploma, that's not just a piece of paper. That is the meta-expert attesting. They are giving their credibility to you. So now the thing is, if you graduate from, let's say, Vanier, and you go on the workforce and you don't know how to read and write, then that hinders Vanier's credibility. And then the next time these people are going to go to hire, they're going to see Vanier They say these people that come from Bangalore, they don't even know how to read and write. Okay, so I'm not gonna wait. So that starts to undermine the credibility, the value of that diploma. Okay, so when people, let's say, cheat their way and they get a diploma illegitimately, that hurts the credibility of the institution. The institution wants to assure that as many as possible acquire that diploma and actually have the skills and competencies that the diploma implies that they have. And then we can get into the question of, well, are all diplomas and all meta experts, are all appraisers of expertise equal? No, obviously not. Is if you go to the dentist's office and you see that his diploma comes from an online university, that should get you to question the credibility of that person. Because I mean, at the very least, there are some technical aspects of the job which you're wondering how could this be done, on an online university. And here in Canada, it's not that bad. We have sort of, nationalized and provincial mandates and so on. But if you go to the United States, there are, like famous Trump University, there are university, there's colleges and strip malls, between an auto parts store and a hair salon, there's a college, and so again, that can be sort of hijacking that credibility of a collegial diploma and so on. So these are all things that we need to be mindful of. Just because somebody is a doctor from where? Doctor in what? For example, going back to one of the earlier examples. Evidence, this is also a very, very important one. Evidence of the expert's interests and bias vis-a-vis the question at issue. So is the person biased? Does the person have something to gain or something to lose? So this is also something that we need to take into consideration in our presentation, in researching for our presentations, is what sources should we look for? We should look for sources, ideally, sources that are that have nothing to gain or lose one way or the other, vis-a-vis the issue, vis-a-vis the claim being made. Okay, that would be the best, because they are objective. They do not want the outcome of, let's say, acupuncture to be true or false necessarily. Okay, they're just interested in what the research is gonna, what the experiment is gonna show. That indication of credibility. So, for instance, if you go to a talk, you might go to, let's say, a doctor's conference. Their PowerPoints will usually consist of the title of their talk, their name, the institution that they come from, and then the next slide usually is going to be a declaration of, of interests and financing. Who's paying them? Who are they associated with? And many of them will say, look, I'm here, I'm not representing any particular interest. I don't have any particular funding. But every once in a while, like, so suppose this happened, okay? Suppose you have a doctor who's going to present on painkillers, on opioid painkillers. He might come out and say explicitly, I'm being paid by, Purdue Pharma and so on, to give a talk about painkillers. And that you have to then reassess everything that he's going to then tell you from that framework. If he doesn't, if he says, no, I don't work for anybody, I don't get any particular funding or financing from anybody, and he gives a talk, and after the talk, independent research reveals that he does receive funding, let's say, from a pharmaceutical company, that is a major impact on his credibility. Okay, he should basically be stripped of his license. Okay, actually, let me give you a little bit of a side story here. I don't remember all the details. This is a while. It was a few years ago. There was this famous scientist in Greece, and she was like this sort of public intellectual. She would go around and give talks at all of these scientific conferences and so on. And she was really regarded as one of the great sort of scientific figures. And she was invited everywhere. And then one day, a journalist decided to just basically do a little bit of research on her. And it turned out that she was a complete fraud. She had none of the credentials or credentials that she claimed to have, and it was basically all made up. So that goes back to the story of Socrates, okay? Is that, and he wasn't doing that, he wasn't researching her because he was even suspicious. He really just wanted to basically, I don't know, he was like writing an article on her or something like that. So he was just basically doing some background research. And he ended up figuring out that this lady is just basically a complete fraud, okay? She's a complete con artist. And everybody was so enthralled and so taken in by the enthusiasm around her that nobody bothered doing even the preliminary research. Okay, so that goes back to the whole story of Socrates. We are so sort of captivated by the ethos of the person that we just basically bow down and give them carte blanche. That if we were to just basically, not even negatively, not even in a destructive or mean spirit, just do our basic homework, we realize, okay, no, actually the story isn't what it looks like. And then lastly is the person's track record. Okay, what is the person's reputation? How many years of education do they have? How much time have they spent in the field? What projects have they worked on? And so on. Okay, so I think that that's indicative of something. If you're, let's say, if you worked on Apollo 11 and Apollo 13, you know, that's pretty good. I mean, you got some interesting work experience there. So the person's, the expert's track record. Okay, so what are some other things that we should consider? Obviously, in that may augment or diminish the person's credibility. Education, how much and from where, which institution, experience, accomplishments, reputation, position. These are all potential indicators. They are not necessary indicators. Let me make this sort of point on the side here, is with credibility, you can never be sure that the person is credible, whether they're honest. They might at that moment decide to lie for the first time in their life. They might at that moment decide to sell out their reputation for some corporate whatever for the first time in their life. There's no guarantee. This is, whenever you're relying on somebody, it's always inductive. Inductive means you cannot bet your life on it, okay? But you may be willing to bet quite a bit on it. So it's never 100%. Let me just put it that way. You might say, look, everything lines up and everything seems to check out, that it seems to be like 99.9%. Okay. But when you're relying on somebody else, you can never establish something to be true in terms of knowledge with 100% certainty. Okay. So these are all sort of augmenters or diminishers of credibility, converging to an upper limit of 100%, but you never get there. Okay. Let me sort of skip over news. Let me go over this very quickly. But I mean, the news is, again, especially nowadays, as I said, there are people that are presenting themselves as news that are not news. But that's not fair. Let me try to, there are some people now, let's say YouTube has opened up this potential. There are some people that are presenting themselves as news, and they're doing good journalism. They are actually doing the news well. They may actually be doing the news better than conventional news outlets. Okay, I think of just some names. I think Vice does a good job. Vice covers some stories in ways that other news outlets are not willing to. There's other also sort of these independent YouTube channels that are covering the news that are in some sense have more journalistic integrity than conventional news outlets. They're not, let's say, as dependent on alliances to advertisers and corporations and so on. Let's say Democracy Now. There's a bunch of good ones, but at the same time, it also opens up the door, as again this sort of chasm between the not knowers and the knowers, for also people that are going to present themselves as news, and they're not news. They couldn't be further from the news. They're basically just propaganda outlets. Okay, but also the news itself is limited. People are limited. We have time constraints. So there are biases that can be introduced in the news that are not intentional. Just a simple example, for instance, I was in the metro and they have these newsreels going in the metro, and they were talking about, this is a little while ago, they're talking about some development, like a truce that was signed between FARC rebels and Colombia with the Colombian government, and they were showing this archival footage of these guerrilla warfare soldiers coming out of the literally walking right out of the jungle, with these big machine guns. And If you're sort of uninformed, you think like, wow, this is happening in sort of real time. This is live. Look at these guys, like well armed. But this is like, you see that just kind of the limitations of the whole production and due dates and timelines. The person who was putting the story together went through the archives and they found this sort of footage of these guerrilla warriors coming out of the jungle with big guns, and that's what they decided to use. Does it misrepresent the story? Yeah, it does a little bit, okay, because that's actually not how it is happening right now, but it's not intentional, okay. So we have to be mindful of biases. I mean, let's say obviously Fox News is obviously right-wing biased. It's definitely has a conservative bias. CNN, I would say is the reciprocal in terms of, CNN, NBC, in terms of sort of a left-wing bias. So just keep that in mind, okay? So, and what can impact the credibility of a source, whether it be a specific person or a news outlet? Their knowledge, whether they are biased and self-serving, whether you're able to uncover that they're biased and self-serving, whether they are distorting the story, emphasizing certain pieces of information, undermining or basically undermining other pieces of information, not wanting to answer your questions. That's a good indication. I think that if you're asking, let's say, a press secretary or something like that, or if you're asking a car salesman legitimate questions that they refuse to answer, and they start to get sort of hot-headed and angry that you are wasting their time, that should be indicative of something, okay? Nobody should try to make you feel embarrassed and use your embarrassment against you for asking legitimate questions. That should be indicative of something. Okay, this is, now let's consider what are some errors. I'll give you a classic mistake that arises with regards to assessment of credibility, a classic fallacy. And this one I want you to retain. Okay, we're approaching the end here. Okay, let me see what time we got. Okay, I'll try to do this in about 5-10 minutes. But this one I want you to retain. Mistaken appeal to authority. This is a fallacy. It's a common problem that people make, common error. And there are two forms of it. This is when we give somebody credibility that they don't deserve, okay? Occurs when we believe the claim of an expert are credible simply because they are an expert. That's the first one. And this one's a little bit more forgivable, okay? So that is to say, we assume that somebody is smart, we assume that somebody is educated, somebody has expertise, and the mistake that we make here is we overstretch their expertise and we give them credibility in fields where their expertise do not apply, okay? And you understand? I mean, if you take, let's say, an engineer who's a structural engineer, and you have an electrical engineering problem, those expertise no longer apply. But you may then, those credentials may be falsely stretched. We do this with sort of doctors all the time, okay? You even had this with, let's say, early COVID conspiracies. You had, let's say, bone doctors talking about, vaccines and all this. So you basically end up crossing the legitimate boundaries of your expertise. What I want to say here, something else that I want to add is, well, hold on. I think I had another example. Well, first of all, we do this with some people in society. There are some people that we sort of give them carte blanche. We are so impressed by their ethos that we just give them more credibility than they deserve. We do this, I guess, with some professionals, with, like, let's say, doctors and lawyers and so on. We think that they're so smart that we then allow them to speak on a bunch of topics where their education, where their expertise no longer applies. And that's very tempting. You have to put yourself in their perspective. If somebody is sort of bowing down to you, we do that. Oh, wow, this person's so smart, like, it's very tempting that if somebody's sort of bowing down to you and giving you that credibility, it's very easy for you as the expert to also be diluted and start to get confused as to what the limits of your own expertise are. Okay, so that's a sort of a problem that we need to avoid. But this is the point that I want to make. It just came back to me, is that if you're in the educational system long enough, what you start to realize is that expertise become extremely precise. So if, let's say, if you're doing a PhD in physics, you're doing, let's say, a PhD in something very specific, like ballistics, or let's say, properties of a specific laser or specific metal. It's like very specific, you know what I mean? So sure, you might have some broad knowledge on other aspects of physics, in your upcoming training. But my point is, there is a narrowing of expertise the further you go down into academia. And people that are not in academia do not know that. Okay, people that have not gone through academia think that, let's say, somebody who's a PhD knows everything about everything, when actually he himself knows that I actually know a lot about something very specific. Okay, and that's good. You want that. You want the person who knows like what's going to happen to this specific metal, in this specific condition in outer space. You know what I mean? Like it's completely useless in the broader sense, but he knows exactly, like super specific, and you want that because you want that guy to know what happens with this metal in this specific context, in this specific, it's amazing, but it's super specific. So that's one of the problems that we make. One of the problems that we make is that we fail to see that there's sort of kind of a telescoping effect in academia. So that if somebody is very well trained, we think that they know a lot. Well, I guess the more you know, the easier it is to know. So yeah, generally the person may be sort of generally well-rounded intellectual, but that nonetheless is expertise are specific. So let me just make this point, is you might be at, let's say, a dinner party one day, and you might be sitting with, let's say, a brain surgeon, and you say, wow, that's pretty cool, brain surgeon, it's really good for you. He might be talking about the brain, and it might be fascinating. And insofar as he's talking about the brain, his expertise apply. But then he might have a few drinks in him, and he might start talking about 9/11 and controlled demolition and nanothermite and free fall speed of structures and so on. And then again, if you're like other people that you are taken in by his expertise, you're going to say, yeah, tell me everything about 9/11. Oh my God, you're so smart. Okay. But what you should say is, let's go back to talking about brains, because you're good in everything, but shut the fuck up about 9/11. Okay. Because you know just about as much as 9/11 as I do. Okay. In other words, your expertise do not meaningfully translate over to that. So I mean, that's a mistake that we made. We give credibility to experts in one field where their expertise do not apply. Okay. That's what we do with doctors. Okay. This is actually hijacked for advertising. Let's get doctors that are credible. Let's take the ethos of doctors and use it to sell cigarettes. It's a strange combination. And then this is even worse. This one is making somebody who's a non-expert an expert. Okay. When we mistakenly believe that the claims of a person who aren't experts have some credibility just because they have some sort of special status, such as celebrity status, or because they have they're popular, they're influencers or so on. So therefore they must know what they're talking about. So this is even worse. Okay, we get sort of Marilyn Monroe selling shampoo, Shaquille O'Neal. We get this. Okay, so celebrity endorsement is a way of utilizing the person's, we admire this person and we use sort of their ethos in a way to sell a product that is completely unrelated to even who they are or what they're known for. So a very important idea. We'll come back to this one next class. When does our confidence lead us astray? We give someone an unwarranted confidence when our desire to believe them outweigh and inhibit our reasons for accepting the truth of their claim. That's very good. We give someone our unwarranted confidence when our desire to believe them outweigh and inhibit our reasons for accepting the truth of their claims. This is what we call wishful thinking. Okay, we'll come back to this one next class. Wishful thinking is the formation of beliefs and making of decisions according to what might be pleasing to imagine, instead of by appealing to evidence, rationality, and reality. In other words, we would like to see the world as we want it to be rather than how it actually is. we act on our sense of the world as we would wish it to be rather than how it actually is. Okay, so this comes back to this monsieur here selling the scrap metal of the Eiffel Tower. So who is this guy? This is Victor Lustig. He's one of the most famous con artists of all time, and he actually did this. He actually did this scam. Okay, he actually sold. He actually took bids for the scrap metal of the Eiffel Tower, and he was so pleased with himself that he was counting his cash on a train out of Paris that after a few years he decided to return, and he did the same scam again. Okay, he actually sold the scrap metal of the Eiffel Tower twice. That's a true story. Okay, in pretty much the way that I've described. Took bids for the scrap metal of the Eiffel Tower. This is another one. I have this. I want to go a little bit quickly here. He had this money-making machine. So he'd be sitting there. I don't know. He'd be at some sort of port city, waiting to get on a boat or something, and he would have this machine next to him, and he'd spark a conversation with somebody at a cafe. We'd obviously be very smart and very charismatic and be able to hold up a conversation. And he'd have this machine, and every once in a while, he'd pump out $100 bill, cha-ching, and he'd just take it and put it in his pocket and say, well, the person would get curious. Well, what's that thing? Oh, that's just, my money making machine from, the federal mint. They have a few of these, so, oh, okay. Well, is it for sale? No, it's not for sale. I can't sell it to you. Then finally gets around to, okay, well, you know what? It is kind of heavy and I can't really bring it. So just give me a few $1,000s and I'll give it to you. So the person gladly gives them the money and he leaves, never to be seen again. And the machine pushes out another $100 bill. And, every half an hour, it's supposed to print out a $100 bill. And then after the last half hour goes, and nothing comes out because you basically just spent thousands of dollars on a box that had a few $100 bills in it. Under the fantasy, magical thinking, wishful thinking, they actually stumbled upon this wonderful deal. So you're there, I like to believe that there are good deals, but every once in a while, that saying, if it's too good to be true, usually it is. There's truth to that, okay? So now I was going to go into another story about my friend who got scammed in a similar sort of way to this money-making machine when he was in India. I was with him in India, and then I left. And a little while later, he got scammed in pretty much exactly this way. Okay, I'm not going to get into the details of that. But you might say, for instance, yeah, but these people are greedy. Okay, and I'm not greedy. So that's not part of my pathos. That is not something that can be sort of taken advantage of. These people are taken advantage of because they're greedy. And this is almost a kind of an assignment that I would like to do in a future class is instead of presenting on pseudosciences and conspiracy theories, to present on some of these famous cons. And what you realize is if you look at a list of cons, you realize that there are cons for absolutely everybody. Okay, there's a con artist for each and every one of you. There's con artists that will appeal to greed. There's con artists that will appeal to fear. There's a con artist that will appeal to pity. There are con artists that will appeal to the negative aspects of human nature, and there are con artists that will appeal to the angelic aspects of your human nature. So don't worry, okay? Just because you're not greedy doesn't mean that you are exempt from this. There are con artists for each and every one of you, okay? And it's a perpetual arms race. In the same way that there's always an arms race between security companies and thieves, there's always an arms race between us as critical thinkers and people that are trying to basically defraud us for their own interests. So that's basically it. Okay. Next class, we'll talk about pathos. We'll talk about the sort of the wishful thinking aspect. Are there any questions or comments there? Any questions, comments, concerns?